Welcome to the Child Anxiety FAQ podcast. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and I'm answering your questions about child and teen anxiety. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I have been working with kids and families for more than 30 years. First as a preschool teacher, then as a parent educator, family case manager, clinical counselor, and now as the owner and operator of Child Anxiety Support, a psychoeducation and support program for parents of anxious children and teens. Let's get started. This week's question is a pretty complicated one. I'm going to read the whole thing. I pulled my child out of school the second semester. She is in special education. The teacher had a lot of her own behavior issues, and it was seeping out onto the kids and my kid. I addressed the school board with the issue, and very little was done. My daughter has been in homeschool for almost 3 months, and her social anxiety has gotten even worse. Now she doesn't want to go anywhere, and it turns out to be a huge argument with tears. I just don't know what to do. First poster, I am so sorry that you and your daughter are struggling so much and that the school board was not responsive to the problems that were happening in school. I don't have an answer for you specifically, and I'm going to use this episode to tell you why I don't have a specific answer that hopefully will guide you into figuring out next steps. And hopefully those of you who are listening who might have a similar situation going on, a child who is struggling with social anxiety, a child who is maybe experiencing some struggles at school that are leading to anxiety, hopefully exploring why these questions matter will also help you figuring out your next steps. The first thing is, you say that your child was in special education, and I would need to know exactly what special education needs does she have? What other diagnoses does she have? We know that we can definitely address child anxiety in kids with all sorts of other things going on, but we need to have a clear picture. When I have looked at the research specifically around working with anxious children with other diagnoses, generally what it says is that we should work on the anxiety if those other issues are being appropriately addressed and supported. In other words, if a child has autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, or any other things going on, we need to make sure those are being cared for appropriately. For example, this child was not in a safe space at school. Could we work on the anxiety when the child was not safe? No, because it is appropriate to be anxious if you are not being well cared for or your needs are not being met. The fact that she is not in that situation anymore definitely means we can look at the continuing anxiety, but I would want to know more about what else is going on for her and make sure that those other needs are being met. Sometimes when people will reach out to me about working with me in the program and they share with me that their child has autism, their child has ADHD, those are very commonly co-diagnosed with anxiety, or if that child also has depression, we're going to be talking about that, making sure those needs are cared for, and then looking at the anxiety. A very recent example is working with a family whose child had sensory issues. We ultimately concluded that child needed to work with an occupational therapist so that we could figure out what is anxiety and what else is going on, what might be sensory defensiveness. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't work on the anxiety as well. It just means we need to have an appropriate big picture of what's happening for that child so that we can make sure we are not ignoring something important. So that's one of the things I would need to know. The other thing is, you say here the teacher had her own behavior issues and it was seeping out onto the kids, and I would want to know more about that. Was this just someone who was being maybe too casual with the kids, not good boundaries? Maybe the kids were goofing off too much, or was this someone who is creating an unsafe environment for the kids? Those are two really different things. I would want to know more about your child's experience in that classroom. Did she feel safe there? What are her thoughts about it now? I would like to know more about the transition coming home And was she excited to do that or disappointed? Is she missing her friends? Is she missing other aspects of school? How is that transition be? The other thing, and this is right at the top, is I don't know how old this child is. Different kids at different ages have different developmental needs. Are we talking about a child with social anxiety who's 6 or 16? I'd like to know more about their history of socializing, their history of friendships, and their history of general anxiety. Did they have separation anxiety as a younger child? That is super common with social anxiety. Is the child motivated to become more social? So I'd want to know about motivation. The other thing is that homeschooling for almost 3 months, I want to know more about the homeschooling. The homeschooling community was my parenting home for many years. And what I know about homeschooling is there is this idea of deschooling, basically, that we need time to de-stress from school or decompress from school before we're actually in our own homeschooling groove. It usually looks different than what we thought it would look like when we first pull our kids out or plan to do it. The idea is that you take 1 month off for every year the child was in school. If this child was in 3rd grade and started in kindergarten, we would think about 4 months of deschooling. So I'm wondering how the deschooling process is going. How is it for you? How is it for your child? Now let's get back to motivation. Is your child motivated to go and have more of a social life? You say here she doesn't want to go anywhere. Where are you asking her to go? Is it someplace she would normally like to be? Is it the kind of thing she's interested in? And where has she liked to go previously? Have you tried going there? I'm also interested about people coming to the house. How does that feel to her? When you say, too, that it turns out to be a huge argument with tears, whose tears? Hers? Yours? What does the argument look like? What does conflict generally look like in your family? What are the consequences that happen when these arguments flare up? How are you reconciling after the arguments? Are there other places where you're having conflict? There's a whole lot to drill down about because anxiety is a whole big picture. I would also ask you to take my Parenting Pitfalls quiz. That's at childanxietysupport.com/quiz. And the reason I would ask for that is it's based on a clinical screener for family accommodations, which is another word for parenting pitfalls. If you score higher on the quiz, then I know there are other areas of anxiety showing up in your family too. I'd want to know all about all of them because even though you've identified as social anxiety, your child leaving the house as the big problem, there might be other places to work where it would be easier to start, where it would be easier for you and easier for your daughter. This is all to say that there is a lot of detail and information that is important to know as we figure out where to start with anxiety intervention. If I can help you with any of that, please go to my website, childanxietysupport.com, where you will find several ways that we can work together. And if you have a question you'd like me to talk about on the show, please go to my website and post it. It's childanxietysupport.com/podcast. And there you'll find the form for submitting your own question. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you again next week.